Hello my dear students, here I am to present the second lecture on disasters and hazards. Let's try to recall what all we did in the previous class. We discussed about the changes that take place around our environment. We found the difference between hazards and disasters, that the human beings can prevent hazards to change into disasters, and we studied various aspects of earthquake. Now we will move on to the next disasters. See, tsunami and earthquake, they are interrelated. Have you heard of the tsunami that took place in our country in 2005? Yes, you have, which led to the loss of 3 lakh people. What is tsunami? Tsunami, the other name is seismic sea wave. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that cause the sea floor to move abruptly, they result in sudden displacement of ocean water in the form of high vertical waves. These high vertical waves are known as tsunamis, harbour waves or seismic sea waves. These seismic sea waves cause only one instant vertical wave, but after the initial disturbance, a series of after waves are created in the water that oscillate between high crest and low trough in order to restore the water level. In book number 1, Fundamentals of Geography, we have studied about the various features of ocean like continental shelf. So now, when a tsunami wave enters the shallow water, the wavelength gets reduced and the period remains unchanged, which increases the wavelength, whereas the same tsunami wave where we have deep water does not gain height. Certain times near the coastal areas, the height can be up to 15 meters or more, which causes large scale destruction along the seashore. These are also called shallow water waves. Tsunamis, they are frequently observed along the Pacific Ring of Fire, particularly along the coast of Alaska, Japan, Philippines and other islands of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka and of course India. After reaching the coast, because the depth of the water decreases, the tsunami waves release enormous energy stored in them and the water flows turbulently onto the land, destroying port cities, towns, structures, buildings and other settlements. Now, we know the coastal areas are densely populated all over the world. These are also the centers of intense human activity. Therefore, the loss of life, property is likely to be much higher as compared to other natural disaster, any other natural hazard in the coastal areas. Unlike other natural hazards or disasters, the mitigation created by tsunami is very difficult, mainly because of the fact that the losses are on much larger scale. It is beyond the capacity of individual state or government to mitigate this damage. So, the combined efforts at the international levels are possible ways of dealing with these disasters. Even India has volunteered to join the international tsunami warning system after the December 2004 tsunami disaster. You remember, in 2004, 26 December, where more than 3 lakh people lost their lives just because of the tsunami disaster. Now, let us study about tropical cyclones. India has a huge coastline. India has a vast coastline and these cyclones are very much dominant in those areas. Tropical cyclones are intense low pressure areas confined to the areas lying between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south latitudes, and horizontally it extends up to 500 to 1000 kilometers and vertically from surface to 12 to 14 kilometers. Tropical cyclone? What is a tropical cyclone? Hurricane, tornadoes, they are like a heat engine that is energized by the release of latent heat on account of condensation of moisture that the wind gathers after moving over the oceans and the seas. Try to see this map. These are the areas which are vulnerable to cyclones. You know children, the Coriolis force we did in first book, this Coriolis force is absent near the equator. So, it prohibits the formation of tropical cyclones between 0 degrees to 5 degrees latitudes. Large and continuous supply of warm and moist air which can release enormous latent heat, and along with strong Coriolis force that can prevent filling of low pressure at the center. These unstable condition through which the troposphere that creates local disturbances around which a cyclone develops. Children, you know most of the weather activities, weather phenomena, they take place in the nearest layer of the air, that is troposphere. Absence of strong vertical wind wedge which disturbs the vertical transport of latent heat. So, these are the causes of tropical cyclones. Now, what is the structure of tropical cyclone? They are characterized by large pressure gradients, cloudless core, that is the center, which is known as the eye of the storm. Generally, the isobars are closely placed with each other, showing high pressure. What are isobars? They are the imaginary lines drawn on the map which join the places having same pressure, equal pressure. The center of the cyclone is mostly a warm and low pressure gradient. Normally, it varies between 14 to 17 millibars per 100 kilometers. But in certain cases, it can be very high as 60 millibars per 100 kilometers. Expansion of the wind belt is about 10 to 150 kilometers from the center. What are the spatio-temporal distribution in India? See, owing to the peninsular shape surrounded by Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, these are the two major zones where the tropical cyclones originate. These are the major two locations, namely Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. The distribution in India, if we talk about cyclones, they originate between 10 degrees to 15 degrees north latitudes during monsoon season. In case of Bay of Bengal, the cyclones, they mostly develop during the months of October and November. They originate between 16 degrees to 20 degrees north latitudes and in the west of 92 degrees east. By July, the place of origin of these storms, it shifts around 18 degrees north latitude and west of 90 degrees east near the Sundarbans delta. Now, these tropical cyclones are also bringing a lot of storm surge. If you see these images, they are very fast blowing winds. With the increase in distance from the sea, the force of the cyclone decreases. In India, the force of the cyclone decreases with increase in distance from Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. So, most of the areas which are the coastal areas, they are often struck by severe cyclonic storms with an average velocity of 180 kilometers per hour. Can you think of such fast blowing winds? What will be the impact on the coastal areas? They will definitely bring a lot of loss to the property, to the structure, to the areas. Often this results in abnormal rise in the sea level also, and this abnormal rise in the sea level is known as storm surge. Let's discuss about this storm surge more. What are the consequences? A surge is generated due to interaction of air, sea and land. The cyclone which provides the driving force. So, the form of very high horizontal pressure gradient and very high fast blowing strong surface winds. The sea water flows across the coast along with the strong winds and heavy downpour, very heavy rainfall. This results in inundation of human settlements, agricultural fields, damaging the crops, destroying all the destruction of the structures created by the human beings. Now, let's talk about floods. Flood can be predicted. The area which are more vulnerable to floods are predicted. Inundation of land and human settlements by the rise of water in the river, streams, channels and its overflow presents the condition of flooding. Like any other natural disaster which cannot be predicted, the causes of floods are well established. Floods are relatively slow in occurrence and often occur in well identified regions within expected time of a year. The floods occur commonly where water in the form of surface runoff exceeds the carrying capacity of river channels and streams and flows into the neighboring low-lying floodplains. Children, don't you think humans are also responsible for this? Yes, the river which has the capacity of carrying a huge amount of water, a huge volume of water, that river gets filled up with sediments, with unwanted things thrown by the human beings. So, the volume of water spills. At times, this often goes beyond the capacity of lakes and other inland water bodies in which they flow. Floods can also be caused due to storm surge, which we have discussed in cyclones, but particularly in the coastal areas. High intensity of rainfall for considerably longer period of time, melting of ice, snow, reduction in the infiltration rate, presence of eroded material in the water due to higher rate of soil erosion. Why does soil erosion take place? Because of deforestation. Why does deforestation take place? Because of the human activities. Why does the infiltration rates go slow? Because of the human activities. So, we cannot say that floods are occurring by the nature. We are equally responsible for it. Though floods occur frequently over wide geographical area. The floods in the south, southeast, East Asian countries, particularly the areas which are densely populated, China, India, Bangladesh, the repercussions are more. They are more frequently hurt by all these floody situations because we are densely populated. Now, we were discussing the role of humans in flood. Human beings play a very important role in the genesis as well as spread of floods. What are the reasons? Indiscriminate deforestation, unscientific agricultural practices, disturbance along the natural drainage channels, colonization of floodplains. Children, what happens if the river is not wide enough? In the floodplains, people start living there, making houses, making tourist resorts. So, when the river flows in its actual speed, that area gets flooded. So, human activities also play a very important role in increasing the intensity, magnitude and gravity of floods. These are the flood zones of India. Can you see, children? Wherever we have perennial rivers which flow throughout the year, these regions are prone to floods. Even the deltas found on the eastern coast. Various states of India face heavy loss of lives and property due to recurrent floods. Rashtriya Baad Ayog, National Flood Commission, identified 40 million hectares of land as flood prone in India. Think, children, 40 million hectares. Assam, West Bengal, Bihar, they are among the high flood prone states of India. Apart from these states, most of the rivers in the northern states like Punjab and Uttar Pradesh, they are also vulnerable to occasional floods. It has been noticed that states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Haryana and Punjab are also getting inundated in recent decades due to flash floods. What can be the reason? Because of the pattern of the monsoon or partly because of the blocking of most of the streams and river channels by human activities. Why do we block the streams and rivers? to make dams, embankments, multi-purpose projects. Certain times, Tamil Nadu also experiences flooding during November, January due to the retreating monsoon season, because it becomes a rain shadow area during onset of monsoons. Now, floods do not only destroy valuable crops every year, but also damage physical infrastructure such as roads, railway lines, bridges, human settlements. Millions of people, they are rendered homeless and are also washed down along their cattle in the floods. Spreading of diseases like cholera, gastritis, hepatitis and other waterborne diseases which spreads in the flood affected areas. These are all the consequences of floods. Let's think about one positive contribution of floods. Every year, floods deposit fertile silt over the agricultural fields, which is good for the crops. Majuli, you remember, which is the largest riverine island in the world, is the best example of good rice crops, paddy crops, after the annual floods in Brahmaputra. But children, if we think about the consequences, this one positive contribution is very less in comparison to the grave losses. Flood mitigation is of course done. Construction of flood protection embankments in the flood prone areas, construction of dams, afforestation, discouraging major construction activities in the flood plains. These are the steps which are to be taken to prevent loss of life and property. Removing the human encroachment from the river channels and depopulating in the floodplains can be a very important step. This is particularly true in western and northern parts of the country, which experience flash flood. Cyclone centers, they also provide relief in the coastal areas which are hit by the storm surge. Floods and droughts are the two parts of the coin, isn't it? If we have more rainfall, we'll have floods. If we have less rainfall, we'll have droughts. It is a common sight to witness that one region suffers due to floods in one season and experiences drought in the other, totally depending on the monsoons. This is specifically because of the large-scale variation and unpredictability on the behavior of monsoons. The droughts are widespread and common phenomena in most part of the country. They are very much recurrent and severe in some areas of India. What is drought? Drought name or the term is applied to an extended period when there is a shortage of water availability due to inadequate precipitation, excessive rate of evaporation and overutilization of water from the reservoirs and other storage structures. It is a complex phenomena because it involves elements of meteorology like precipitation, evaporation, evapotranspiration, groundwater, soil moisture, storage, etc. So, it also affects the socio-economic life and ecological conditions. There are various types of droughts. Let's discuss them one by one. The first type is meteorological drought. It is a situation when there is a prolonged period of inadequate rainfall, marked with maldistribution of same over time and space. So, a vast area which does not get rainfall. Agricultural drought, it is known as soil moisture drought, characterized by low soil moisture that is necessary to support the crops. So, the result is failure of the crops. This area has more than 30% of its gross cropped area under irrigation, and such area is excluded from the drought prone category. So, agricultural drought is specially related to the soil moisture which leads to the production of crops. Hydrological drought. Hydroliths related to water. Hydro means water. It results when the availability of water in different storage, reservoirs, aquifers, lakes, etc. falls below what is the needed one. So, when the replenishment does not take place due to precipitation decreasing, hydrological drought takes place. Ecological drought. when the productivity of natural ecosystem, because we cannot survive without the ecosystem, it maintains the balance. When the productivity of the natural ecosystem fails due to shortage of water and as a consequence of ecological distress, damages are induced in the ecosystem and there will be nobody to support the humans, flora and fauna. Such type of condition is known as ecological drought. See the map, 19% of the total geographical area of the country, 12% of its total population suffers due to drought every year. About 30% of the country's total area is identified as drought prone, affecting around 50 million people. Isn't it too much? It is a common experience that while some parts of the country reel under floods, there are regions they face severe drought, scarcity of water during the same period. These are the extreme drought affected areas. Most part of Rajasthan, particularly the areas to the west of Aravalli Hills, Marusthal, Kutch region in Gujarat, they fall in the category of extreme drought affected areas. Here, the district of Jaisalmer, Barmar from the Indian desert, they also receive less than 90 millimeters of annual rainfall. These are severely drought prone areas, parts of eastern Rajasthan, most parts of Madhya Pradesh, eastern parts of Maharashtra, interior parts of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka plateau and the northern parts of interior Tamil Nadu. These are the regions which face severe drought throughout the year. Children, these are the maps given in your book. Try to identify the regions which are moderately affected by drought, less affected by drought. So, this is your homework. Now, what are the consequences? Large scale death of cattle, other animals, migration of human beings, livestock. This is a common visual that is seen during the drought. Scarcity spread of many waterborne diseases and other diseases. Try to find out the consequences of droughts. You also know what happens with the scarcity of water. Try to write down in your copies. These are the consequences of drought. Whatever you visualize, try to write it down along with crop failure, movement of people, all these things. One more work I want to give you. Try to talk to your grandparents. They call it as Trikal. Trikal means Akal, Trinkal, Jalkal. Akal means scarcity of food grains. Trinkal means scarcity of fodder for the animals. Jalkal means scarcity of water. So, all these things are known as Trikal. So, there is a planning done for the drought prone areas also, because droughts have both immediate as well as long term disastrous consequences. Even the social environment is hit because the people are moving from place to place, far off places in search of water. So, what are the strategies for the physical environment? Identification of groundwater potential in the form of aquifers, transfer of river water from the surplus to the deficit areas, planning of interlinking of rivers, remote sensing, satellite imageries, they can be used to identify the possible river basins that can be interlinked. Dissemination of knowledge about drought resistant crops, proper training to practice the same can some be long term measures that will be helpful in drought mitigation. So, children, when we study about tsunami, floods, droughts, we know how to mitigate them. Try to save your life, try to write down the do's and don'ts to save your life, and we will study about landslides and other mitigation methods in the next lecture. Thank you. Take care. Jai Hind.